and we'll see how that goes. Okay. All right. So welcome to today's broadcast. Thank you, Dr. Jay, for joining me today. I'm really happy to have you. It's been keep asking questions and just see how that goes. In any case, this is being recorded, so it can always, well, that's not really going to fix anything, but we're just doing our best over here. So, Dr. Jay, tell me what you've been up to since I last spoke to you. I know you're working on a project, and I hear there's been some developments.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So yeah, wow. When did we last? I think it's been more than a year.
It was probably 4 years ago. It's probably been 2020 that we last spoke.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, around that time, I started the A Nazi on Wall Street project, which was to adapt my dissertation research.
Time's flown.
I know, time has really flown. Adapt my dissertation research on it's a history PhD on spies, Nazis, and Wall Street into a dramatized miniseries. I launched that project in 2020, and actually it was is in response to three things that happened, all sad things that I'm turning into joy and a great story. The first thing that happened was on New Year's Day, my father, who's beloved in the entertainment community, passed away. We didn't even know yet what COVID was, but it just took him so fast. And he had been an actor, and mainly an actor, but also producer, director for like 50 years. And I wanted to do something to honor his legacy. I grew up around the film industry, but I wasn't involved in it that much. And then the other thing that happened was I was immediately laid off as the pandemic spread, and then everything shut down. So, I'm sitting here with a completed PhD, on a topic that a lot of people find very interesting, and wanting some way to continue my father's great energy and in the world, and to honor his legacy in the entertainment industry. So, thus, I founded a production company, Elusive Films, to launch the A Nazi on Wall Street project, which is a pitch for a dramatized miniseries based on my research on American companies that did business with Nazi Germany. I know we've talked about that before.
Yes.
Longtime watchers and listeners will remember, maybe. So, I knew nothing about how do you pitch a show to Hollywood? What do you even do? And so it took 4 years really to figure that out. I assembled a group of people. I know many creative people, script writers, producers, composers, actors, directors, all sorts of folks. We all kind of came together. And at first, we thought maybe we would make a short film to kind of get Hollywood's attention. Eventually, that kind of changed to, well, maybe we'll do a movie. But it's such a big story with so many characters and so many things that it really made more sense to do it as a show. And of course, everybody loves to binge watch shows, so why not? And so eventually, we started figuring out how to develop a pilot script, how to write one, and then figuring out what else goes into a pitch. Mainly, the other big thing you include with a pitch is what they call a proof of concept, which is basically like a mock trailer of what your show would look like a very, very, very short film. So I had a Kickstarter in 2022 because filming anything, even really short things, to make them look good is extraordinarily expensive. I had a successful Kickstarter. In fact, backing up, in order to even do a successful Kickstarter, we had to do a podcast to get a bunch of listeners and supporters together. So I did essentially like a history podcast for 2 seasons, inviting people to come on and talk about the relationship between the period in which our show takes place and now. And of course, there's a lot to talk about, the encroaching fascism in the world, rise of right-wing populism, and other parallels. So that's the Nazi on Wall Street podcast. And so yes, and then we had a successful Kickstarter. We shot a proof of concept in Atlanta, put together a whole crew to do it, put it all together. We had composers make original music, and then put that all together into a package. I also wrote a thing called a show Bible, which is a lengthy document that describes all the characters and story arcs and things. This is also something you normally include in a pitch. Put that all together, and that was all just about finished at the end of last year, right around the time I moved from Baltimore to Washington, D.C. To continue my work as a federal contractor in public health, which I also started doing around the same time as the beginning of this project. It's been quite a ride. I'll talk about that later. But and now the next phase is kind of the most exciting, but also the phase I have the least amount of control over, which is like actually getting it out to producers in the world. That's been at times frustrating, but also really exciting. We had a producer early in this year who just seems to have disappeared entirely, which I've learned is kind of a normal course of business. But then now we are working with another producer who seems even better. So I don't want to blow up anybody's spot or divulge any details or raise any expectations further than I probably already have. But we're really excited. We've been able to share this with people with lots of industry experience who really are interested and excited about this pitch. And the only thing I'll add before I stop talking is that we now at this phase, we have to hold back a lot of details about what we're doing because everybody wants to feel like they're getting something new and exciting that nobody knows about. So I'm breaking the rules a little bit coming on and talking a bit, but this is my passion project. I'm so excited, and I'm so excited to share what we're doing.
Well, thank you, Jay. I think there's a slight delay, so you'll be hearing me talk a few seconds after I talk, but I just wanted to say that's fantastic news. I'm so excited for you to be even sharing with us how much progress you've made, and all of the elements as well are interesting that go into a pitch that I wouldn't have thought of, to have to complete a story Bible with all the arcs and the characters and their biographical background details, I imagine, and then as well as preparing all of this stuff and shooting a short film as proof of concept. I saw that only once before in 30 Rock episode, which I saw recently for the first time, where Tracy Jordan shoots a proof of concept character in which he plays Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Jefferson's Sally Demings, well, I wanted to say slave and partner and coerced partner. I wanted to say a bunch of words. I didn't even know what to pick. But Sally Hemings, who advocated for her children to be freed. Anyway, that's just a sidetrack of saying that's where I saw proof of concept, because he brought a horse into the 30 Rock studios in that comedic episode. So tell me more about the genre. I'm obviously within the grounds of what you're allowed to disclose and what you can still keep the mystery for the interested producers and executives that you need to stay on board and keep titillated with little bits of sequential disclosures. But what can you tell me about the genre of your show that you're creating?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, mystery is a great word to use. I'm the historian. I want to tell everybody the whole story, but that's not how you would do this. This is a true crime film noir drama that takes place in New York City in 1940. Folks are really tuned into Rachel Maddow's podcast, Ultra. I guess the only thing I'll say about that, because I've been listening closely, is that she's just scratching the surface of the story I'm telling.
You have more to offer than that podcast, is what you're saying. I think that if you enjoyed the introduction to the subject matter contained in the Ultra podcast, be prepared for a feast of further details in your offering.
Oh my gosh! I mean, I love Rachel Maddow, but she's a journalist. I've spent my the last 2 decades of my career just studying this topic. So while she's done
Yes.
other things, I've been mainly focused on this. So we can forgive her for not knowing
Yeah.
as much as I know, and have written about and published and so forth. And by the way, I mean, really avid listeners could probably pick up all sorts of breadcrumbs if they look me up and look for say my dissertation, or manage to find my research blog. They could probably find out a heck of a lot about where my thinking is going for this project. I haven't really hidden a lot of the research I've done. I had a blog. I really have stopped using it, but it's got like most of my graduate school papers on there. Uh, big research projects I've done in the past, and then of course my dissertations over on ProQuest. And to me, like, this is, when you read it, it seems very dry. These are case studies of companies that have made some unethical choices and ended up working with Nazi Germany and with a real bad crowd. But to dramatize this a bit and give it through a human lens,
human element,
and also put all of these stories together in context is just incredible. Like, some of the moments are very, very dramatic. I want to talk about them so much more. Can't just yet.
Well, let's talk about it thematically.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it thematically, because the resonance of your project, what gives it life probably, is the incredible parallels, which is a prompt for you to embrace this project. Probably, actually, you probably started your research before Trump was on the scene. At what point did you commence the Nazi regime?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I've been doing this much longer than Trump has been a politician.
Which year did you?
Oh, this is a great story, actually. Your listeners will like this. So, I came. My dad was an actor. I also wanted to go into creative industries, but I chose visual art and music. And for a while, I was a video game designer for PlayStation in the late '90s and playing in bands. And then the .com bubble burst, and my career in graphic design for video games went on permanent pause. But the mortgage industry was hiring, and so I was just in a cubicle. I wasn't like a fancy trade or anything. I was a low paid guy actually executing the trades, and it turns out, what we know now is that there was a lot of problems in the mortgage securities industry that was going to lead to a major crash. And I saw I saw what was well, here, let me give you a great story. So, I worked my way up into the mortgage securities department while supporting my band and art lifestyle. And on my first day in the securities department, I put together they call them pools of mortgages, or you're securitizing some mortgages, and I'm the one actually executing the trade for $10 an hour. It's a $200 million trade. It's my first trade. It was stacks of mortgages, and you're stamping them, and you're getting them all together to send them out to Countrywide or Bear Stearns, companies people might remember that went under when everything finally crashed. And so I put it, and then I have to kind of do the digital version of it, all the data entry, and you go to hit send, and there was a big red error message across the screen, and it's my first day, and I'm freaking out, and so I double check everything, and I pride myself on being very accurate and fast. Hence the video game passed, and so I take another, however long it took, to check all 200 mortgages or whatever it was. And then I'm like, okay, everything's got to be right. Hit send again. And there's a big red error message again. And now I'm like sweating. I'm starting to panic. I'm freaking out. My boss sees me starting to look worried. She comes over to my desk and she says, "Oh, what's wrong?" And I'm like, "Well, it's, everything seems right, but it won't send, And she sits down in my cubicle and she's looking through, and she starts like clicking in and changing numbers, and I'm paying close attention, and she's adding income to various borrowers. just adding 10,000 here, whatever. And, and she gets up, she's like, try now. And I hit send and it's green and it says go and it's fine. And she's like, yeah, next time just do that with all of them, and walks away. Like, no big deal. And I did that for like, this was the normal process of business in my department. I was one of, dozen people doing this every day, all day, 40 hours a week, actually more like 60 hours a week because it was so busy. And somewhere along the line, year or two in, I was in my mid 20s. I was starting to like really think. I had kind of some intellectual development. Maybe that's what kind of led me to eventually become a scholar. I wanted to read the American American bankers circulars and starting to watch the financial news, and like I'm taking an interest in the industry in which I was working. And I was like, wow, this seems really bad. This is like 3 years before the crash. I was like, this is going to be a big problem. It's kind of like those movies, Margin Call, or what's the other?
Or the book Lies Poker, The Big Short.
Lies Poker, The Big Short.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because I just watched both those movies for the first time recently, after all these years kind of away from this. But I was like, this is going to be bad. So, okay. So anyway, back to your question. So one day I'm waiting for the bus because these guys, while I'm crashing the world economy, didn't even pay me enough to afford a car. I'm sitting waiting there for the bus, and there's a bookstore next to the bus stop, and I was feeling pretty low. I was like, I gotta get out of here. This is really bad. This is not going to work out. And this is still years before what would eventually happen. So I walked in the bookstore and I saw a book, and it was a book about companies and Nazi Germany. And just like the lack of ethics, and something clicked, between what I was doing during the day and what was happening in this book. I was raised Jewish, I was taught about the Holocaust, but I really didn't know like, what was really going on as far as like who was actually building the weapons in Germany. And it turns out it was a lot of American companies, not all, but many big companies, big brands we still know today were involved. So that I something clicked for me, and I was like, I need to quit my job and I need to restart my degree. I had dropped out of art school to do PlayStation games and be an artist and whatever. And to go back as a history student and study World War II, and study, I was just obsessed with this topic of American companies in Nazi Germany. And I fell down the rabbit hole for years. I was, this time I wanted to do it right. I wanted to be a straight A student. I was very diligent. And of course, my history teachers really beat me up because they were like, you're reading a bunch of conspiracy theory. It turns out like this topic, there's a lot of trash out there that's like, unfortunately, mixes a lot of truths, half-truths, and non-truths. So it makes it really unreliable. And if you're doing history degrees right, you learn to critically analyze sources and really pay close attention to why people write the things they write, what's their viewpoint, what's their ideological background. And I was good enough at that I got into, I was encouraged to go to grad school. I got into a great program at Boston College. I did about two master's degrees worth of coursework when I was there because I love to write. You were supposed to take one writer's workshop. I took 4 of them to write these incredibly big, large scale research projects, which are again on my blog. You can read them. I studied things like Swiss banks and things like that. And at that point, there's a whole other story. But eventually, I ended up in a PhD program at American University. And these programs are very long, take about 7 years. So even by the time I had finished my PhD, I'd already done many years of research in the archives and then, reading about the topic. And then, then I went into my professional life after that as a writer. But I all along continuing to kind of work on this field. So then that's what led me eventually to, I used to joke, I'll stop here, but I used to joke with my colleagues, we were all in the PhD program together because, the big crash really killed the history profession. A lot of a lot of those tenure track positions and were replaced by like less than minimum wage adjunct positions, and whole departments are cut. There weren't any jobs for people trained like me to do history. Everybody wants to talk about history. Everybody says history will judge, yada, yada, yada. But nobody wants to pay for it. Nobody wants to pay professors what they used to pay to have like, a decent, stable lifestyle to actually teach, hordes of undergrad students about the very important lessons of the past, like say avoiding fascism. So I had to go do other things. So we used to joke that it's like, it's probably easier to get a show greenlit in Hollywood than it is to get a tenure track position anywhere. And then somewhere around 2020, that was no longer a joke. We're like, well, let's actually try to do this.
That's fantastic. I'm so proud of how prodigious you are with your output. I mean, I have floating writer aspirations, but you've actually done things. You sounds like you were so driven to do 4 writing courses at BU. Was it BU, Boston University, and then
Boston College.
Boston College.
Oh, and they would hate if you mistaked it as BU. They're rivals.
Oh, rivals. Oh, good. I'll file that bit of knowledge away. Boston College, and then to do your PhD and to have all of this research that who knew would be so relevant. I mean, I'm sure there's many people who did actually know, who've been pointing to the machinations of the right wing for a long time, saying these people are working to overthrow democracy in order to advance their interests as oppressing America under its theocratic thumb and theocratic oligarchic thumb, whereby corporate interests, not in a healthy way, but in an unprincipled rollback regulations in order to more profitably poison large swathes of people kind of way. Like, don't make us constrain our pursuit of our goal, which I've called them sometimes the morbidly wealthy, because I don't have a problem with the existence of wealth. I'm not a communist, but if it's morbidly wealthy, then I'm trying to draw an analogy with an eating disorder where you begin to single-mindedly pursue a goal. If it's thinness, people are telling you your health is in jeopardy, or at least in the case of fascism, the health of millions of people might be in jeopardy. You don't care. You're single-mindedly pursuing the expansion of your wealth and power, and the bodies that litter the landscape, or the people's dashed hopes and dreams and life potential is merely a pleasant consequence and evidence even of how powerful you are if you're able to cause so much death and suffering. And in that way, I draw on Adam Serwer, who said the cruelty is the point. It's not the only point, but the cruelty definitely becomes a reinforcing sadistic feedback loop whereby they cause suffering and then go, wow, look at me, look at all I've accomplished. And it's a weird method of evaluating your own accomplishments, but it is what fascists get locked into. And to look at the culpability of American companies, I think, is so important, just to understand the dance that we have to do to mitigate the influence of the theocratic Christian right and their corporate crypto bro partnerships that they formed. That alliance is powerful, and that America has a history of succumbing to fascism. The other side of the coin of pursuit of prosperity for all can be the unprincipled pursuit of profit. And that's what your research dug into with this hitherto under-discussed and still very under-discussed, and you're hoping to change that, but role of American companies in facilitating literally the militaristic strength of the Nazi regime, from what I'm hearing you say. And I bet you want to tell me more about it.
I do. Well, I do. I love the terms morbidity, succumbing, because I've been working in public health for the last 4 years for various agencies within health and human services, which is a very big part of the government. There's lots of stuff going on. I was brought in during COVID, but just to go back before I talk about that a little bit, as a historian witnessing all this and using my writing skills for that, is that, one of the reasons I wanted to tell this story through a human lens and dramatize, because for a long time I was like, I need to do documentary. It has to be exactly accurate. I was reacting to all these conspiracy books. I was really against the idea of embellishment, but I came around to the idea that I wanted to tell this story through a human lens because, a lot of people really do see this as like, it's good versus evil, black and white. And like humans are messy and complicated, and the choices they make are weird and irrational. And these companies and the people, the humans that ran them, and also the humans that were coming after them and investigating them and bringing them to justice, which is the other side, which I also can't talk about much because I don't want to give too much away. But I mean, the FBI was very much on their tail, but they're, hilariously outmatched for the most part. But there's a lot of like different nuance. I mean, again, people can go and find my dissertation, and this is a major part of what I wanted to study, is like the human choice, like because a lot of companies later argue, oh, we didn't have a choice. And so my research question was, well, did they? Did they? And so they did, they did, and there's kind of a spectrum here, because like every company's, the people that run these companies is different. Some of them really got sucked in and got in deep, and then it's too late. Some of them really were kind of like lying to themselves about what they were doing. We don't have a choice, but then they do. And then of course you've got folks like Henry Ford who are like true believers in the Nazi cause.
Bring on the eugenics, the improvement of the human race by winnowing out undesirables.
So there's a spectrum there.
Yes. And it's so fascinating to me, because when you said the messiness of the human condition and the choices that people make have all sorts of varying motivations and various self-deceptions that propel them. And what resonated with me was thinking about January the 6th. So I'm very much anchoring the story you're telling with how relevant it is, because it was almost like the vestiges of conscience in Mike Pence and other people who were Republicans, who were ostensibly supposed to be on Trump's team, and their actions and their inability to go, oh, well, I can't quite talk myself into doing that. And whether it was a concern to stay out of prison, whether it was a concern of, Mike Pence was supposed to have talked to his son who was in the military or studying at West Point, and said, no, that's not the right thing to do, Dad. And he was like, okay, I hear you. Whether that's apocryphal, whether that's just something Pence said to make himself sound better, these are all illustrations of how outcomes, these big swathe outcomes, are still painted onto a canvas by the small strokes of individuals' consciences. And some are so critical that I will have to think of another analogy at some later point that shows how little cogs can be so consequential. But the little cogs of conscience are turning the whole mechanism of what happens to all of us. And that you are looking back in time in history, because sometimes people can see more clearly when ego's removed and they're not looking at the present, and they can step back in time and see a time when stuff happened, people made choices, and you can also see the conclusion of those efforts. And so it's like a morality. History is like a morality tale in that respect. I mean, as you say, historians have to be so careful to go, well, they're often a morality story that's shaped by the teller and the teller's interests. But if you do the hard work of picking apart the morality tale, or the actual events, you can come to a really informative conclusion about how to best shape your conscience in this moment, and what you should do, and who you should side with, and who you should invest in helping succeed, because their success is critical then to the success of your society and your ability to stay safe as a family, as a community, from fascism, which, like Freud says about Thanos, facilitates the death wish getting enacted all over the world, really. Did you do much with Freud? No.
No, I mean,
I was going to say, does Freud come up?
I mean, I've encountered it a little bit. Doesn't really come up as much in my research. Business ethics scholarship is really just philosophy. It's really philosophy with a business veneer. But I mean, if you read business ethics scholarship, Business Ethics Quarterly, any of these academic journals, it's essentially my mentor in graduate school was the business ethics professor at American University.
Dr. Alan Lichtman.
Oh no.
No,
different professor. Okay. Although, yes, we do have to talk about Dr. Lichtman, don't we?
We do.
Okay. Well, this is a great segue, because what I wanted to say was, for as you know, like getting involved in it rather than just being kind of a passive participant as all this stuff is going on. That's really the last 6 years of my story. After PhD, after school, spit out into the world. The first thing I did with my skills as a writer is I worked for political campaigns. First in the first really big pushback against Trump fascism in the 2018 blue wave midterms.
Woo!
And then in 2020 for the presidential election, and in both cases, I focused on. I was like, okay, where can my efforts be most valuable? Where can I make the biggest impact with my power as a writer, having been highly developed over many years, and also of my historical understanding of how people. Messages and ideas resonate to people in order to affect a positive change. And in both cases, I picked Pennsylvania as the state I wanted to singularly focus on. It's so important to the Electoral College. I kind of observed that like the popular vote was basically gone from the Republicans, that they had really very little hope of ever winning the popular vote again in this generation, and that really is the Electoral College I had to focus on, and thus focus on Pennsylvania. So in 2018, I worked on more than 36 races in that state, from state legislative, like state house and state senate races, all the way up to congressional senate races and the gubernatorial reelection. I was the lead writer for my team. We won 80% of our races. I felt very good about that, very empowered. And of course, it took a village. I was the lead writer, but I was supported by a whole bunch of really smart strategists and other folks, graphic designers and all kinds of folks. Then in 2020, I scaled up my endeavor and worked for another group and did a voter's guide for the entire state. So basically, I had to write up, promote every race. It was called the Progressive Voters Guide. And there's another one, by the way. I'm not working on it this time, but if you just Google Progressive Voters Guide Pennsylvania, it's out there. I'm not sure if you can find the old one I wrote, but we described every race all the way up to Joe Biden, all the way down to school boards and stuff like that, and of course we have to also talk about their opponents, and so we flipped that state in 2020. So again, I think
so key. That's a battleground state that was key.
So important. And you can look at some metrics. It was something like 300,000 actual like unique voters used that guide in that election. So that I was like, here's a demonstration of how I can use my abilities. But of course, campaign writing is it's not a consistent job. It happens during a few months, every few years. You need to do something else. But it turns out then we had a deadly pandemic, and it's a little bit of a side story, but it will make sense. While I was working on my dissertation, I had to pay the bills. Also, typically history PhD programs are 7 years long, and you only get about 3 years of support. Fellowships is very common, which is, you basically have to be wealthy to get a history PhD. I don't know how people do it, or go into debt, which is what I did also. But I got a job at the National Academy of Sciences. It just turns out there was a job board. They had recently turned 150 years old, and there was a team of senior historians who are looking for junior researchers like me to do this work. And it's supposed to be like a 6-month gig turned into like 4 years of intensive research. And you're looking through these archives. There's a lot of like programmatic review and committees talking and subcommittee meetings and presentations of research. It turns out that was really good training to be a science writer, which is actually a big part of the writing career world. Lots of scientists all over the world and in the US need writing help. We sit in on meetings, we write white papers, we ghostwrite journal articles, we do communications, social media, we write speeches, we do all sorts of stuff, meeting summaries. So when COVID hit, there was a huge demand kind of in the public-private partnership world to get science writers to help with people are trying to do research as quickly as they possibly can to address the pandemic, whether it was to how to help patients, how to develop vaccines, how to just organize efforts across the world to distribute care. And so I got pulled in to the federal contracting world, doing that. So I was in meetings with like Francis Collins of NIH, and like I was in meetings with like these top people, both in drug companies and also in various leadership positions of the federal government. As a historian, watching this unfold and being involved directly in doing that research, and then of course, as the pandemic waned, there's a lot of other major, really important things. You know, we're still battling worldwide against HIV. We're still working. Tick-borne disease is a huge growing issue with climate change. We need to think about blood and tissue safety. You know, we're not replacing blood donors, older blood donors, with young people as quickly as we would like. Go give blood, please. You know, and numerous other projects that I got roped in and involved in and still work on to this day. But in order to kind of sustain myself, but also to give back to the community.
That's so commendable. And I hadn't really thought about that, but of course the developments, the rapid fire developments in what was known about COVID, what was known about the efforts to try and get a vaccine to the public, all require so much public interfacing. And Trump was trying to invent his own public interfacing on the fly. And that was part of his downfall probably in the 2020 election, which is that people could see what a bombastic, self-aggrandizing blowhard he was. COVID gave him an excuse to go what he thought was like genius. Cameras love me, put me front and I'll just blab on and people will see how I'm the best at everything. And in the business world, as you know, confidence sometimes does let people get away with a lot. In the pharmaceutical and scientific world as well, people will follow people who say things with an air of confidence. But that only worked with Trump, provided he did not try to opine on shit that he knew nothing about for more than a few seconds. So you gave Trump 10 minutes to speak to a camera about COVID, and he starts saying, oh, so I hear disinfectants are good at killing COVID viral particles, so how about we inject them? And then it becomes apparent that when he says, oh, people say I should have been a doctor, I know the best, he doesn't even know that antiseptics, if taken internally, will kill you. You don't put them, you avoid contact with the skin, and you definitely avoid ingesting them. And that there were, and people watching that, even who like Trump, could be, or, you know, Republicans who reluctantly vote for Trump could be like, okay, I'm second guessing that now because that dude should not be near levers of power. He talks a lot of shit that can have negative consequences. So that is really cool that you were there doing that work of trying to communicate with people and keep yourself afloat financially, because it's a good way to derive income when you are giving to people and being compensated for that. But the work that you do has value. And I imagine that feels really good to get up in the morning, even if you look around at people who are wealthier and go, couldn't I have chosen an easier profession?
Extolling the lessons of history is a really important role. Historians are important. That's why you should fund them.
Yes.
It's really important. And, you know, there's a much less abstract, more direct line between writing and working with scientists, and helping a patient, helping somebody who is sick, who needs care. So that in that way, it's actually really satisfying. Now, would I like to continue working as a historian? Of course, you know, and that's why I have a company and I'm working on this project. And
you're working as a historian artist who's instead of keeping history in an academic discursive field, to bringing it into the human, showing it through a human lens, because also of the digitization of our attention spans means fewer people. Actually, I don't know what the statistics are in terms of book readership, but I feel that I see a lot of people admit to reading less books since the pandemic and even since the advent of Trump, because under stress, we want quicker relief for our problems. We want a quicker feel-good boost, and it's harder to commit to sitting down with a book. You're more neurologically activated. You've got more of a paraphysiological fight or flight. Things are activated anyway. And And I've had that since I became a parent, but it's been exacerbated for me, at least, by the Trump era. And I've seen a lot of admissions to that effect on social media as well. So I think that's
I've written I've written a few fact sheets for health agencies on stress that are probably pasted up in various clinics around the country.
Wow. Your handiwork is probably so all over the shop, and it won't have your name attached to it, but your work is there. Yeah.
As long as I can keep the lights on.
Keep the lights on, keep food on the table. One of my older listeners, hello, Jeff, she's been around for a while, noted that Trump said we should swallow a light source. Well, I don't think he said swallow, but swallow would have been one of the options, because he said,
shine a light.
Yeah. Well, he said, could we use that internally? Because UV light also kills COVID. Yeah. Could we use that internally? Like, he was just speculating, like, look at me, I'm a genius. I'm engaging with ideas nobody's ever thought of before. And then people will say, thank you, Trump. You're such a novel thinker. Nobody thought of sticking a UV light source up in one of your orifices to cleanse the body of COVID. Genius, epiphany. Science is so grateful to you. Oh, my Lord. Yeah. And he
what a great idea.
Thinks he's such an innovator and such a complete guy. I saw a clip, a montage of Trump saying that he knew more than other people in about 20 different fields. And he was like, nobody knows as much of me about this. Nobody knows as much as me about this. He thinks he's a doctor. He thinks he's an expert in every profession, because I'm imagining a psychiatrist would say something about an unstable self-concept where he feels very bad about himself, but he pushes that down and instead compensates by blowing up this concept of himself. That the narcissism is anchored by a vast emptiness and self-loathing. And who knows? I'm not the psychiatrist to do that. I did interview a psychiatrist once who contributed a chapter to The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about this current election, because you brought up Lichtman, and I feel like this is actionable and useful information for your listeners. So I've become in recent months the Lichtman Whisperer, and if you don't know that name, you may know the 13 Keys to the White House. This is a professor who is probably, you may have seen, he's been on all the news shows lately. He's also now got his own social media, and the reason I bring him up is that he was on my dissertation committee, and at American University. I know him quite well. So cool. I was his teaching assistant for his U.S. presidency course during the 2012 election, which means I taught a good deal of that course myself while he was busy giving interviews. He would kind of like, we'd be in a huge lecture hall and he'd be like, oh, I need to take an interview. Go, Jay, take over. And I'd walk to the front of the lecture hall, be like, okay, Eisenhower, let's go. But anyway, for those of you who don't know, Professor Alan Lichtman, American University, in addition to being a prodigious historian of right-wing politics in the U.S., I was also a junior editor on a book called FDR and the Jews, about which is more related to my topic. Which you can check out too. But he also, in addition to being a historian of all these things, he also developed this prediction system called the 13 Keys to the White House. It's a really interesting story. Essentially, he finished his PhD and was doing a postdoc at Caltech, and was approached by Dr. Niels Bohrach. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Who is a Soviet earthquake scientist. And he approached Lichtman because he was like, hey, this is like in 1979. It's like this, we're in the Cold War. We could all die from nuclear fire. And it's really important who the leaders are in Russia and the United States. And Russia does not have elections, but the U.S. does. You're a historian of the U.S. presidency. That's your expertise. He says to Lichtman, and he says, I want to develop a system to predict elections. Elections are kind of like earthquakes. I predict earthquakes. And he said, basically, the way that works is that, the party holding the White House either stays static, no earthquake, status quo, or upheaval. The party changes and there's an earthquake. And we can apply similar principles. So he spent like a year developing a system looking at elections going back to 1860 for basically historical fundamentals that stay the same regardless of whether you're in the 19th century or the 21st century, that can be used to predict if the party holding the White House stays the same or changes. And after a year, they developed this system. Lichtman developed this system called the 13 Keys to the White House. And essentially the way it works is that it's a bunch of statements that are true false questions. And if the answer is false, the key is turned. And
Yes.
if 6 or more keys turn, the party changes.
Yeah.
He was very unpopular in 2016 when he predicted Trump would win. I didn't want to listen to him, to my own peril. Now I pay very close attention. But he started predicting. His system went live in 1982, 2 years before the 84 election. Lichtman predicted that Reagan would win based on these historical fundamentals. I can go through them if you like, but essentially,
yes. No, do.
We're all watching. Yeah, okay.
Do, because it's so fascinating to me that earthquake scientists suggested to have a clinical algorithmic approach to going, what over time has shown us will be the effect if these factors are in place. Let's identify the factors and make a system. He did it. Okay, tell us the 13 keys.
Yeah, and I'll just make the disclaimer, like he puts out a new book every 4 years on the 13 keys that explain all the elections going back to 1860, including his prediction for the current election. He also has a YouTube channel now with his son you can watch. So I'm just a Lichtman whisperer, and it's just because I've been learning and talking with him directly about the keys for more than a decade.
You're amplifying this important work.
I'm amplifying,
and it is important.
Yes. And it's given me a little bit of solace because we are so inundated. What Lichtman says all the time, and what I say too, and this is, we're very much on the same page here, is the pundits and the polls our emotions are constantly being kind of pulled and pushed and pulled by this, when really the system works because of historical fundamentals. And here's the thing, something I probably should have said at the outset: Lichtman's been right every time since 82. Now there's an asterisk. In 2000, he says the election was stolen, and many people believe that. If they had continued, if the Supreme Court had not stopped the count in Florida,
Jeb Bush was the governor, and George Bush had appointed some of the judges.
Yeah. The judges were questionable. Also, studies had come out later showing voter intention that, Gore would have won that Florida and would have won the election. Anyway, so if you take 2000 out of it, Lichtman's been right every time for like 40 years. So that is a better track record than any poll out there. So anyway, so here, just to give you a breakdown of what the system is. Of course, you can look it up, but essentially there are these 13 fundamentals. The first one is what we call the party mandate key. It's where did the party holding the White House win more seats during the last midterm, or did they lose seats? Now, in modern times, last 20 years or so, usually the party wins the White House and then loses seats. So typically that key is already flipped against the White House party. So that key has been baked in against the Democrats since 2022. Now that was very close. There was supposed to be a red wave, but anyway. So I would count that key myself if I was interpreting it as a little more shaky and not totally against the Democrats. Anyway, so then there's two keys that have really been in the news lately that I've been like really nervous about, and that's the incumbency key and the party contest key. Incumbency key means that the incumbent who holds the presidency is running for re-election. And you don't need to be a political scientist or historian to know that incumbency is going not just with the presidency, but all political office is very powerful.
It's powerful.
You get a chance.
It's very powerful.
You get to amplify your message using your particular position. You have a record to run on because of the things you've done. So we flip that key against the Democrats now because Joe Biden dropped out of the election. So that's one more key down. That's why I was very worried when he dropped out. But the key that's related to that is the party contest key. Now, typically, if the incumbent's running, there's no party contest. He is the undisputed leader of the party. But when there's an open seat, there's usually a competition, and that often helps the opposition because arguments that come out during party contests can be amplified and twisted in ways that help in this case, it would help the Republican Party. So I was very concerned, but that didn't happen. Everybody came and backed Kamala Harris immediately, and that was really great to hear. That means that key did not turn, because remember, you only can lose 5 keys. Yeah. So then you were going to say something. I'll stop there for a second.
Just that they retained a little bit of the incumbency. I can see that it didn't. You can still maybe turn the key, but at the same time, because they retained half the incumbency with the endorsement of Kamala Harris by Joe Biden, it was more like passing a torch, and that probably helped. And people's fear of losing the incumbency advantage helped them go. And she's such a great candidate to rally around and behind that. That process has been amazing and really invigorating to a lot of people, I think, and to the hopes of people. And hope, even though it's amorphous, intangible, difficult to quantify thing, seems more quantifiable in terms of rally spirit and just the word on the street of people who see somebody else in a Kamala t-shirt saying, "Where did you get that? I want one. I'm so happy." Yeah.
Bringing back the joy, as Tim Waltz said last night. That's fine by me. So yeah, and I'm taking a little more complex view of this, listeners, because typically the key is either turned or it's not, right?
Yeah.
But I think if you can kind of take a more like subtle shades of gray, like, well, this key is looking, really good, or this key is shaky, and that's kind of the way Lichtman is portraying it right now, because he has not made his final prediction yet. He won't until following. A little bit of time following the Democratic convention, which is in a couple weeks. So he will probably make his prediction sometime in the next 3 weeks, I imagine. But anyway, so this is the state of the keys I'm giving you based on his analysis, which happens to match up with mine for the most part. So then we've got those 3 keys. Then there's the third party key. Third parties, like a powerful third party candidate that's polling well. It signifies some discontent with the White House party, right? RFK Jr., though, is not polling very well. Usually the threshold for Lichtman to turn the key against the White House party is like if they're polling at 10% or more. RFK has been all over the map. And in fact, typically, as you get closer and closer to the election, those polls tend to go down as more people from
get more serious
come home to their respective camps. And of course, RFK's had nothing but like bizarre, bad stories. This bear cub thing is repulsive. It's and anyway, so I don't want to go too far to that, but that key favors Democrats. So then we have 2 economy keys. We have a short-term economy key and a long-term economy key. And to break these down in simple terms, the long-term economy key just means that the current term that the White House party is in, the economy is better than the average of the last 2 terms. And that's an easy one, because we had one of the worst crashes during COVID, during the Trump administration, we've seen since the Great Depression. So the long-term economy key favors the Democratic Party, favors the party holding White House. That's an easy one. The short-term economy key has gotten a lot of discussion. We had a stock market scare. I don't know what the market's doing today, but and there was a vibe session early in the year, but honestly, like the short-term economy key also favors the White House, because if you think about like massive investments in infrastructure, the things that the Biden administration has done, that is going to fuel economic boom for years. Manufacturing in the U.S. has grown in ways we haven't seen since before the 80s. Like, this is a big deal. These things aren't short-term; these are long-term, big. Large-scale job drivers and economic stimulants that are going to be good for the economy. So short-term economy, and basically it's the key is, are you in a recession or not? In order to be in a recession, you have to have 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, and we're very quickly getting to the place where it's not even possible to go into a recession before the election. So I'm going to call that key also as very safe for the Democrats. That one's good.
Thank you, Biden, and thank you, Keynesian economics, where governments invest in their country and invest in their people.
And we've known this since the New Deal era. A lot of Republicans in their trickle down theories they've tried to make mark it up slightly. Fantastic. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we've been hearing that for years. Turns out it wasn't true. No matter how much they tried to spin it, we have enough data. Anyway, that's a whole other discussion. So, okay, so then we have two economic keys. We also have, let's see, we have a scandal key, which this has also been discussed at length. Scandal has to, according to Lichtman, the scandal actually has to affect directly the president and has to be acknowledged widely by both parties in a bipartisan way. And we've had a few scandals like that. We've had Bill Clinton, we've had Richard Nixon, and we've had some others in the more distant past. So Warren Harding, for example. And so, there's a lot of things that have been tried to be made into scandals, say Hunter Biden or stuff like that, but those do not rise to the level of flipping the scandal key, according to Lichtman. Sorry, I'll stop for a second. Okay. So then we also have social unrest key. Social unrest, again, we have to think in historical terms. Social unrest has to rise to a level where it really feels like it's destabilizing society for that key to turn against the White House party. So you have to think about, like, say, 1968. I mean, we had Martin Luther King was killed. There were riots in various cities. You had the height of Vietnam War protests, millions of people in the streets, major protests at the Democratic Convention. People think we're going to see stuff like that again. I say people need to take a breath and read 1968 history. In fact, 1968 was so tumultuous. There's an entire field of history. I think I have a few books on my shelf that are just devoted to that year because so much was happening in the world. I mean, you also had the Cultural Revolution in China. There's like a lot going on worldwide, post-colonial struggles. You had protests all over Europe, labor struggles in Europe, all in that one year. So that level of tumult, Lichtman doesn't see that happening. Now, I know we've had protests because of the Israel-Gaza conflict, yes, but does not rise to the level of these other historical examples, according to Lichtman. Now, Lichtman has not called that key. He wants to wait and see what happens over the next few weeks. So we're not there yet. We don't know. These types of things are very unpredictable, but we're not even talking about the level of like Black Lives Matter protests. Again, millions of people in the streets in every major city. We're not quite seeing that in this particular case. So social unrest key favors White House party for now on that. Okay, so then there's we're almost to the end here. There's two foreign policy keys also, and these are the ones that are really rough for the White House party. Do you have a call? Do I need to
start? I had a call and I turned it off.
Okay. So two foreign policy keys. One is foreign policy success. The other one's foreign policy failure. Success means there's some demonstrable thing that happened that everybody can kind of rally around. Now, we just had one of the biggest prisoner swaps since the Cold War, and some important journalists were released from Russia. It's a big deal, but it's the kind of thing where it's very difficult, and especially in this media environment, for something that to really stick and to really resonate and for people to continue talking about it. It seems like it's already out of the news cycle because there's so much other stuff going on. So we're going to have to see if maybe that hostage swap can flip it. Unfortunately, there's a lot more foreign military failures out there. Biden can be blamed for not securing a ceasefire in Israel-Gaza, which is also, is that fair to even ask, considering, like there are other players involved that may not want that on both sides of that conflict. Also, Ukraine is a stalemate right now. And even though that could be considered a success, and that Putin did not just roll over Kyiv in 3 days like he promised he would do. A stalemate isn't necessarily considered a success or a failure. And then, of course, we go back further. The optics of leaving America's longest war in Afghanistan were not great, even though it was really important to end that war. We keep hearing the Trump people saying there were no wars under Trump. Dude, Afghanistan was going on. America's longest war, guys. Like only people who are in the propaganda bubble can believe that. Critical thinking is there was a major war, guys. Anyway,
it's such a hallmark of fascism for people in the propaganda bubble to be so insulated from truth, because the key thing a fascist does is come out and say, don't trust the media, and disparage them with a repetitive name calling. So for Hitler, we know Jürgen Press. And for Trump, fake news, don't trust them, only trust me as your source of news. And that lobotomizes such a significant part of the population. It's
Gaslighting, man.
Not the
Gaslighting
truth
is the worst.
delivery. What did you say is the worst?
Oh, sorry. You froze and I thought you were done.
Yeah.
I said gaslighting is the worst.
Gaslighting is the worst. And Jeff.
Oh, it froze again. Oh, no. Yeah, F-16s.
No, I froze again.
Okay. So let me just finish up the keys real quick because I do have to run.
Yeah.
But so the foreign policy keys are leaning against the White House party, but we don't know yet. So, but that's still only 5 keys or 4 keys. And then we get to the 2 final keys, which are charisma. These are the only keys that really have to do directly with the candidates themselves. There's the incumbent charisma, or the candidate charisma, and then there's the challenger charisma. And these are really high threshold key. It's a really high threshold to change these keys because these keys were created to essentially account for certain historical figures that are just like transcendent figures. We're thinking Abraham Lincoln. We're thinking JFK. Actually, Lincoln was, I don't know if he did flip the key because JFK, Eisenhower, Reagan, these are individuals that drew broad support in a bipartisan way, like them or not. They had broad support. FDR won 4 elections. I mean, these are folks that are, they are incomparable. When you look at the rest of the presidents, right? So at this point, Lichtman is not given Kamala Harris the charisma key. She's very popular with Democrats, but doesn't reach that level according to his comparison. Now, some of this we're gonna have to let history judge later. Maybe she becomes this transcendent figure. We don't know right now because we're right in the middle of these events unfolding. Trump certainly does not have the charisma key. He's also very popular, but among his own base. And there's lots of presidents like that, but they're not the same as, say, an FDR. This is a different class of politicians, like once in a generation. Obama turned that key in 2008. He's, greatest orators of his time, right? So that leaves you 1 extra key turn. So taking the whole picture, 5 keys potentially turned against the Democrats. That means Harris wins. So essentially the way Lichtman looks at this, and he has not made his final prediction, is that a lot would have to go wrong right now for the Democrats to lose the election based on this system that has essentially been right every time since 1984 at every election. He's 11 out of 11. Again, if you don't count 2000, if you believe that, if the Supreme Court did not put their finger on the scale, Al Gore would have won. And even if you want to take that off, it's 10 out of 11 times. Again, better than any track record of any poll. I guarantee that. And because this person is my professor, he was on my committee, helped develop my own research. He's, now a colleague who I sometimes email just to ask questions about his keys. This is something that I felt very passionate about sharing because it's helped me calm down a little bit and take a step back from all the noise, all the punditry, all the polling that is often very unscientific and very shoot from the hip, and really can be kind of damaging to our emotional health. Yes. So we all need to kind of take some historical perspective, or at least I suggest to anyone who might be listening to do that, because in this particular perspective, it looks like very much like the party holding the White House will continue to do so, because the keys are really based on governing, not on the horse race that sells advertising for media firms. Governance is boring. It's not a story that New York Times wants to put on their front page. They want to put something on there that's going to upset you and get you to look at their website. That's their model. It's been their model since at least 2016 with her emails BS.
Democratic anxiety sells magazines, sells newspapers.
So it takes some more of, look at the party that's governing well. That's the party that's likely to hold the White House. Well,
I have a solid faith in the Biden-Harris administration's accomplishments, and I have a good, solid amount of faith in Harris-Walz and their campaign, because, yes, on the horse race vibe front, for me, they're winning, and they're well, I'll illustrate with a story that I was stopped in the supermarket by a young man who saw my Kamala Harris KHAF t-shirt and said, "Isn't it amazing? I can't wait to vote for the first Black female president." And young people often do have that fear of missing out or desire to be part of something historic. And this is historic. And in fact, a lot of people assumed Hillary Clinton would win and it would be a historic win, but there was a level of complacency that made room for sexism to foster. And the third party vote to be too high, people going, Hillary Clinton's going to win, Donald Trump is a buffoon, and I can just have a dinner party story to tell about how I'm so cool, unique, and different, and I voted third party. And that was a critical problem in the electoral college system in the Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So I have the vibe faith, and then I have the Lichtman key faith also.
Yeah, we got both.
Yes, big picture governance. I mean, I think it contributes to my vibes in that I do look at their accomplishments, which doesn't get a lot of traction in the media, but gets a lot of traction in my particular media bubble on social media bubble on Twitter, where people are constantly sharing memes with each other, to the converted mostly, but to say, look at all the things they've done, look at the infrastructure bill, look at climate change developments, look at everything Biden and Harris have done for us. We are very well versed with some of those achievements, but we know it doesn't have a lot of purchase. More broadly, because governance doesn't generate anxiety or fascination or titillation in the way that scandal and other horse race elements do. So I thank you, Jay, for sharing, going through in detail all of those keys from your mentor, your professor, your committee research facilitator, Dr. Alan Lichtman, and people can look him up and they can go and find your blog from the sounds of it to look through your research if they want to take a pre-dive into what your show might be like, to see some of your research background there, to get into the weeds of what has shaped your creative output in that way. Jeff says, thank you, sir, as well. So you have an appreciative audience member, which is always nice. Thanks, Jeff. And yes, we're feeling good. I think we're going to take away from this feeling good. We've got things to look up and read more if we have the mental, intellectual spoons to do so. And I've got some more energy to do that. I think I'll be trying to Google your blog. Do I just use your name?
Yeah. Although I think try Jason instead of Jay. I think that's my legal name. So I think I might have used that in the past. I don't remember. Yeah, Jason Weixelbaum Publications and Research, I think is the name of the blog. There's lots of good papers in there, lit reviews, things I've written, kind of leading up to my dissertation research. Fascinated by lots of different aspects of the business world in the 30s and 40s. We should plan to get together after the election because I have a lot of thoughts about what happens next in U.S. politics, provided the election is not catastrophic. I've hinted at some of that on the A Nazi on Wall Street podcast, which I've mostly taken off platforms, but I think it's like once you put a podcast out there, it's really hard to actually get it off stuff. So you probably can find it. Guess who our first guest was? It was Alan Lichtman 2 years ago.
Wow.
So yeah, people might be able to find that.
A Nazi on Wall Street?
The A Nazi on Wall Street podcast. Yeah. I know because I still get messages from our hosting service that people are listening anyway. Even though I've tried to kind of tamp down our social media presence as
to retain that mystery. Retain the mystery.
The producers and the funders in Hollywood, they want to feel like they're the first to get there, and indeed, regardless of how many people know about some of the stuff out here, the things that have not yet been portrayed on screen are numerous and dramatic, and I cannot wait until we get to the next phase, which we hope maybe soon. I've got even a big meeting later tonight about that. Some big names I can't reveal.
Have you
just yet?
Don't reveal. But if you haven't tried pitching to Tom Arnold yet, he was my last guest. He sometimes replies to my. Yes.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll talk to him.
He's Jewish because he converted, I think, when he married Roseanne Arnold.
All right,
I don't
we'll
think
talk offline.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you, Dr. Jay Weixelbaum. Thank you, Jay, for being on the show, for sharing with us the fruits of your research, your fulminations, your insights, and the knowledge you've gleaned from listening to knowledgeable and working with knowledgeable people about the prospects for the election and about the insights and human condition stories you're going to bring to us. Fingers crossed, knock on wood, ring bells, do other lucky gestures for your show relating, right. I don't know what the title will be, but relating to your podcast, A Nazi on Wall Street. And if in genre terms, did we call it a noir thriller pertaining to the involvement of American companies in the weaponizing or the furnishing Nazi Germany with weapons?
Yeah, and well, and all the great people who worked to stop
and
them,
the people who stopped them. Yes, the hunting, right. the crime story chase of stop people who are getting ethically compromised as well as nationally compromised, that they were compromising American national interest by funding a hostile foreign power. Oh, Jeff said Nazis in Mar-a-Lago. Yes, that's another story. People
that'll be the sequel.
Yeah. Okay, well, take care, and thank you so much for dropping in today. I also have to go and check in with my children and tell them they can use the internet again. Okay. I asked them to stop just in case that was interfering with the bandwidth I needed to conduct the interview. So I'll say, please, children, proceed. And thank you to our listeners. Yes, take care. Talk again soon, and we'll make more arrangements to chat again. Thank you.
Fantastic. Bye.
Bye.